One of the things I like to do is talk about the thesis statement in a paper. And something I do with a lot of students, I kind of discovered this last year, is I like to compare your thesis statement to Beyonce. So your thesis statement is the Beyonce of your paper, where it's the most important thing, it's the point you're trying to prove. And I like to use the rest of the paper as like Beyonce's backup dancer. So when you're adding something into your paper, you have to remember, like, is this really gonna support Beyonce in her concert? Is this really gonna make the point? Is this gonna, like, really help her put on the best show? So I like to make that analogy, and usually that'll get people to get the joke and understand the topic.
That's a really good one. My question is, do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and learning, and how so?
Absolutely. I believe that humor is a great way to establish rapport and connection with students, so I use humor in all of my classes, from literature to writing to theater to public speaking. I will do things to break the ice. Oftentimes, my theater classes, we will play improv comedy games, which is a lot of fun. In my other classes, I'll simply make jokes or references to popular culture. And what this does is it establishes me not just as an expert in the field, but also as somebody that students can relate to.
Yes, one thing is that when I'm talking about the criminal justice process in particular, I generally like to get students involved as much as possible. I try to get them to tell me a story in which where they think they've been discriminated against, or just something that actually relates to them. And then what I do is I'll add my own spin in it. So, case in point, I believe in our last class, I talked about how many of students like law enforcement, and or how do students feel about law enforcement, how do students feel about police officers. And granted, I didn't get a lot of participation, but then I started saying, okay, it's going to affect your grade. Or then I started saying, well, let me tell you how I feel. And then I started talking about the fact that I look extremely suspicious, that I look like I am doing something illegal all the time. And I try to break the air in that way by putting it back on me to make myself seem as though I am, one who breaks the law constantly. And then it makes them look at me as like, yeah, right, you can't be serious. And then it kind of puts it on me. And then when they start seeing that I'm the one who is, going through this, and I've experienced crazy things as well, then they're more inclined to like talk about their stories. But when I talk about myself, I generally do it in a humorous manner, because I think that's when students start to look at you as a human in a way, as opposed to a professor who is standing up here just spitting out knowledge, as opposed to like actively engaging and trying to get the students to learn. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Can you give me an example of a topic you teach and a humorous story, joke, or like picture, video you use?
When I talk about an intro to criminal justice, I talk about the criminal justice process in which a person encounters the criminal justice system through law enforcement, all the way up until the time that they're actually processed in court, into the time that they're sentenced in corrections. And so what I do is I generally take that topic, because it can be extremely, extremely boring, and I apply it to something relevant. So something that was really pronounced in during the time that I was quote unquote growing up. So I take that I take that topic and I apply it to the O.J. Simpson case. A lot of students, they don't know too much about O.J. Simpson. Like, granted, this happened around 93, 94. I was in high school. And so when I talk about that, you know what I mean, students are looking at me like, yeah, I heard about the case, and they have snippets and stuff like that. But generally, people don't know that O.J. Simpson, he was a football player. And just the fact that all this evidence was, ganged up on O.J. Simpson, pretty much, saying that he's guilty. So what I'll do is I'll just throw in something like, okay, so we have all this evidence, and we also have the fact that his Heisman Trophy was found at the crime scene. And then they're just looking at me like, Heisman Trophy? And I'm like, yeah, it's a joke. And they're just like, oh my gosh, really? And so it's just stuff like that. Or, goodness gracious, we talk about September 11th. And generally how I break the air with that is I just talk about where I was at September 11th. That happened in 2001. A lot of the students, they were extremely small. They're tiny. They really don't have a strong recollection of it. But when I tell them that I was sitting in my psychology, brain, and behavior class as an undergraduate, and I have a professor who comes in so nonchalant, like, hey, what about those towers? And it's just kind of like, what? And so I go about my day based off of this professor's attitude towards it, and I'm just telling them how oblivious I was to everything. And they're like, how can you be so oblivious? And I'm telling them that I'm oblivious to it because this is before we had the age of cell phones, you know, before
Right.
cell phones was really where you got all your knowledge at. So I'm walking around carefree, not knowing anything going on. And I had to base it off of the fact that I couldn't see. You know, a lot of people were like not attending classes and stuff like that. So when I kind of put it into how honestly clueless I was and how I was just running around like crazy and how O.J. Simpson was this actor that people really don't know of, and I try to break it down in those instances by adding jokes, I think students start to really understand things a little bit more.
Well, you honestly just taught me something I didn't know his Heisman Trophy was
It was
there.
not, it's a joke.
Everyone wants to have that distance. Everyone wants to have something where they can make it their own and learn the way that they need to learn.
And what would you like for the potential viewers of this video to take out of it?
That I'm cute? Nah, I'm just playing. What I want everyone to understand is that being able to learn is at your pace. And when we do learn, even though humor sometimes is frowned upon, humor is what gets us through life. You laugh to help recover through pain, and you laugh to get everything fixed for your day-to-day basis, or even just to get through the day. And with teaching, you don't want anything to just sit on your mind all day. Dr. Rich taught me a long time ago that someone is always going to remember to the first and the last thing you say. If you lead off with a joke and you keep it with the same topic, more than likely they'll finish.
All right, thank you, Dwayne.
You're welcome.
One story I use about being on time. I tell this story about a student that was, I thought it was a funny story because I'm all about you have to be on time. So one of the finals, you have to do an interview. And I express to my students about being on time. If you're not on time, then you get a 0. That's it, you don't interview. So the one student in particular, he came running in class and he was about 3 or 4 minutes late. And I looked at him and I was like, you know you can't interview, right? He was like, yeah. And then I looked at him, I was like, so what happened? He said, just a long night. And I said, was it worth it? He's like, yeah, it was. And I gave him half the points, just the fact that he was honest. But I tell that story every class because I want the students to understand, although I'm a stickler with time, I mean, if you're upfront, I mean, I thought it was comical that he was serious about it. As a former college student, I get it. So I understand what he meant by it was well worth it. And, we get a kick out of it every semester when I tell that story.
Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and humor, story, joke, or media that you use to teach it?
What did she just say? And it reels them back in, and then we can go on.
And can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and the humorous story, joke, or media that you use to teach it?
Well, I pretty much use humor. The way I am is the way I am, or as Popeye used to say, I am what I am. And so pretty much the way I am in one class is the way I am in other classes. But for example, I teach...
Yes, my own personal experience with it. You're looking for an
Either
anecdote?
way, yes.
All right. So last semester, what was that? Fall 2016. I was teaching a learning strategies course, and this course is designed for students who are on academic probation. Many of them are unmotivated. They have a lot going on personally, and for whatever reason, they have not been successful academically. This is a step before they actually receive academic suspension. So one of the introductory lessons that I gave to them, I printed off lyrics from a T.I. rap. And prior to passing out those lyrics to them, I told them that we were going to read a piece by a gentleman by the name of Clifford Harris. And they were all prepared. They were looking for something deep and profound. And I said, get on your job. It's time to get on your job. It's motivation. You can look into my eyes and tell I'm ready for whatever. Anything that doesn't kill me makes me better, which are lyrics from T.I. And it took the students a while, and then suddenly someone said, wait a minute, this is T.I. Yes, the gentleman known as Clifford Harris. But the point of the exercise was to read something motivational, for them to find various means of motivation to help them to get through college and to get through life successfully. So whether it's something deep like a Maya Angelou poem, or something as simple as a Ti rap, for them to find that motivation and make it through, persevere.
I wish one of my teachers would have used that. That's a good one.
Thanks.
Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and the humorous story, joke, or media you have used to a topic you teach and the humorous story or joke that you use to teach it?
Just this past Sunday, I used an illustration of how we somehow get out of touch from where we came as we move along in life, going to school, going to college, and graduating. A lot of times we fall out of touch from which we came, and I was making humor on how in 1959, when I first moved into the project, I thought it was a castle because I didn't know any different. And the whole congregation thought it was funny because we know that the project was not a castle. But it came off very humorous, and it also made them sensitive to the fact that we can't forget those who are still in that environment, and it helped me to move along with my teaching because they got the purpose of what I was trying to convey.
Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improved your teaching or your students' learning of the content?
Absolutely. First off,
It did to get them into a comfort zone, maybe something like a joke or your own sense of humor that you include to get people to open up a little bit when in those settings.
Okay. Well, working as a program director for the campus radio station, I had to train around maybe 30 students every semester. I had to train them on the soundboard, and once we got a telephone, I had to teach them how to pick up the telephone and put them on air. I had to train them on virtual DJ, which is how we play the music. And a lot of people they didn't learn very fast. So I have to break it down to them, and thankfully I'm patient and I want them to ask questions because I want to make sure that they get it so they can be able to do it on their own and they can have that experience. So they'll already be equipped for that when they go out into the workforce. So what I try to do is I try to joke around with them or relate it to something current, something
Mm-hmm.
that's going on. So, with a lot of black people dying from white cops,
Mm-hmm.
on the soundboard there's button 12.
What's
So
button 12?
button 12 is one of the telephone buttons.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell them, but 11 is for the telephone as well. So we use 11 and not 12. So I like to tell them, people they don't mess with 12, which is stands for the cops. So I say
Yeah.
don't use 12 because we don't mess with 12.
Right.
So use button 11. So
Right.
that wakes them up, that gets them going, and they remember that. Okay, we don't mess
Right.
with 12. We use button 11.
Right.
And when I'm teaching them virtual DJ, so I have to teach them how to switch between songs. So you're becoming a DJ
Mm-hmm.
in itself. So I like to tell them you have to look at the beat of the song before you choose a new song to play because
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure that the new song it's around the beat that's already playing. So I tell them imagine that you're at a party and the DJ is playing Meek Mill. So Meek Mill, he yells in all of his music. It's
Right.
really loud, it's upbeat. And then all of a sudden the DJ turns on Adele. Like that's a big switch. That's like night and day. Like you just killed everybody's vibe. Your vibe is killed.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, don't be the person to kill somebody's vibe when they're listening to the radio station.
Right.
So that's how I try to get them engaged
Right.
and wake up so they can learn it.
Have they ever spoken to you about how that's helped them? Is there any personal stories about somebody who maybe came up to you?
And so I give you a prime example. When I was speaking in an inner city church in Wilmington, I was talking to a congregation of mostly adults, but it was a service dedicated to young people, or as they say, the youth. And you can lose the attention of young people in seconds if they're turned off by how you're standing, how you're speaking, the tone of voice, anything. They're automatically turned off. So I think I was speaking about a man by the name of Joseph in the Bible, and Joseph was a young guy in the Bible, and he um he was very gifted, just like all of us are. He was very gifted, and so young people probably weren't paying attention. But something that it described Joseph's characteristics. It said that Joseph was he was tall, he was strong, and I even added in something like he was handsome, just like me. And everybody started cracking up because in a setting like that where you wouldn't expect someone to crack a joke about a serious topic,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? You're automatically like, yo, what did he say? So let me listen to more. You know what I mean? This guy
Right.
isn't so serious.
You got their attention.
Yeah, I got their attention. You know, it's sort of like when you're writing an essay. The hook is supposed to grab them. It's supposed to make them want to read more. You know,
Mhm.
and that's sort of like what humor is in politics. That's what humor is in ministry. That's what humor is in teaching. You know, you have to grab the attention of the student, of the listener, of the audience, etc., and you have to make them want to hear about more what you have to say.
Definitely. Now, one of the last things that you just said is something that I want to be able to grasp before we conclude. And it's what you said about teaching.
like
Right.
you would be able to do with women. So you have to come through the back door. So like we'll introduce a whole different set of topics and then relate it. It's easier to relate it to sexual assault as opposed to just coming in and saying, look, this is what we're talking about. This is what's going on. And then if you can introduce humor into it as well, then it's even better. So let's say at a workshop before, um, we were talking about consent, right? And I said, now let's say you give me permission to borrow your car one day, right? On a Wednesday. You go to bed Friday night, wake up, I'm in your car. You said I could use it,
Right.
but it was just for that one day, right?
Right.
That's what consent is.
Right.
Even if the girl says no now, or she says yes now and says no down the road, that's consent.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
But when you get them to think of it in that way and things that are relatable to them,
Right.
it's way easier to talk about.
Right.
Then you got the open discussion, and people are way more willing to open up and talk about things. And then a nice little 5-minute conversation, the introduction can turn into a 2-hour
Mhm.
conversation because
Mhm.
now people are revealing their feelings, things they're not usually talking about.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So it's almost as if once you've broken up that tough ground or kind of broken that ice a little bit,
Right.
that allows the teacher or the leader in that situation to kind of then go a little bit deeper into the subject material that they need to. So, taking an example like that, can you think of maybe a particular class or a particular professor, and maybe a joke or a humor method that they incorporate that allows that even playing field in the classroom? And how does that make you feel when sitting in that class? And like, how much more engaged are you in that class because of that professor's teaching strategies?
Automatically, who comes to mind? One of my favorite people, Dr. Tay.
Okay.
Teaches Spanish.
Definitely.
His class, my last name's Rawlings. So the first day I had him for class, he said, "Oh, your last name's Rawlings. You must be related to Jerry Rawlings." I said, "Jerry Rawlings?" He said, "Yes, the president of Ghana." I said, "Do I look like I'm from Ghana?" And from that day on, he kept saying, "Jerry Rawlings' son, Jerry Rawlings' son." So it's like it builds a bond. You know what I
Right.
mean? I'm more willing to listen to him just
Right.
because he knows
Right.
who I am. Especially something like Spanish, which is difficult in its own right,
Right.
depending on who you ask. For
Right.
me, it is. But you know what I mean? And learning Spanish from someone that you're willing to listen to, or just any subject in general, but especially Spanish or foreign language, something that learning it from someone you're willing to listen to is way better than just look. Here's the book. We're gonna look at this lecture. Here's the PowerPoint. Go on Blackboard. Do the test. That's it. You want to be interactive.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Definitely being interactive. So, do you believe that also using that humorous content, it improves the teaching and the learning of that content to your fellow co-workers leaving or later on throughout the day that you thought of? Like, what's something that kind of got you through that connection point when, dealing with those calls, maybe it could decrease productivity that you all need to get done in the office, but how do you push through that? So think about a time when that happened that, you pushed through it anyway and still got your work done.
Okay, I would say the most recent would probably be about 2 weeks ago or so. Bernie Sanders had put out a bill where he wanted to increase the amount of pharmaceutical drugs coming from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And Senator Coons actually voted against that bill. And then later that day, when I came into the office, there was a guy who called from somewhere from Wilmington, but he was extremely upset about Chris Coons vote against that bill. He thought that he was, being a sellout, that he was, just trying to collect a check from the big pharmaceutical companies. He said several things. One that really sticks out. He talked about how he hopes Senator Coons chokes on the money that he receives from these pharmaceutical companies. He felt as though Senator Coons, took a knife and stabbed him in the back, ran all the way down his body, and things of that sort. It was just a very interesting, gory call, and a lot of negative things he said. And after that call, I felt really down about myself. I was like, wow, like this is not me that he's talking directly to, but due to the fact that the words were coming at me on the phone, it kind of got my spirits down, kind of got me into an emotional state. And after that, I went to my supervisor and let her know what happened with the call. And it's not as funny now as when it was then, but what she said is very simple. She said, "You know what, Landon?" She said, "Things can only go up from here." Now, I mean, like I said, that might seem something that's very simple, but for where I was at mentally and emotionally at that point, that's something that really lifted my spirits. And the fact that she said it in kind of like a sarcastic manner, because we know going each and every day that things could possibly get worse, but we always are in the hopes that things are gonna,
Of course, go up from
better.
there.
Right.
Yeah, wherever up from
Yes,
there is.
whatever that means.
All right. So lastly, you covered some important stuff that you talk about at the workplace. I want you to kind of wrap up thinking about what you do organizationally on campus. Pick whichever organization and remind who's watching again about what organizations that you're discussing. And talk about when you're conducting meetings on your own or conducting workshops internally or for the student body. What do you do to kind of ease tensions within the room when people may be a little distraught, turned off, or just not necessarily engaged in what's going on? Can you reflect on a time or something that you do consistently as a teaching mechanism that keeps people up in good spirits, or a joke that you use often?
Well, based off of meetings I conducted, I'm going to speak a little bit on MOCA, the Men of Color Alliance, which I am president of this year. And, we have weekly meetings, and throughout those meetings, there are times where things might tend to get serious. Things might tend to get dull or boring due to the fact that we're conducting business. And one of the things that I do on a consistent basis, which people have told me before, I have a very sarcastic demeanor. Though I might seem serious about a lot of things that I say, at the end of the day, I'm not serious. And the ways or the things that I use to kind of lighten up the room as far as humor, I'll take regular words and I will make them sound bigger and more grand than what they really are. Like, for example, one of my favorite words to use is phenomenal. When I say phenomenal, I say phenomenal like you've never heard anyone say phenomenal before. As you see, you're laughing just by me saying that word, phenomenal.
Right.
And it's just through that sarcastic demeanor or the sense of just taking something and going above and beyond that really helps guys kind of wake up, kind of snap out of their little dullness or their little bored sensation, whatever they're going through at the moment, and just makes them say, okay, well, I'm here now. The president's engaged. Let me get engaged. Let me wake up. Let me, do what I need to do to get things complete for the meeting.
Right. Well, thank you. That's perfect. You actually ran down a lot of our points that we wanted to hit perfectly. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to use that joke because I want to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for helping us out with our study. And if you had one word to use to describe today's event, of course, what would it be? And use it in the best way that you would use it.
That word would be phenomenal.
All right, again, thank you for participating, and thank you for your work. Thank you.
And that's something that is spiritual. But what I like to do is I like to use humor. Rather, I have a youth ministry, which is a men's ministry within Force Ministries, and that's on this campus. And what I like to do is I'll have my lesson plans for the ministry, and specifically what I chose to do at one ministry. So, specific example is I chose to have it where I had bought like a bag of purple Skittles, and during this ministry was to teach. If things don't go your way, will you still hold faith? But the thing is with me is I chose to buy this bag of Skittles on purpose, and I had random people come into the ministries that knew nothing about it. And with this bag of Skittles, the way I use humor with this is that I dispersed it out amongst the young men, and I knew that somebody wasn't going to get Skittles. And then what I chose to do was I chose to say, "Oh well, nah, it's like you're not getting none," and make it seem like I was showing favor to the others in order to teach a lesson behind that. See, it's a lesson that he might not have gotten if I didn't use that humor tactic, because it's humorous because of the simple fact that he didn't expect me to do that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that's the type of humor. He didn't expect me to not give him something that I
Right.
gave everyone else,
Right.
but it was a hidden lesson in behind it that he may not specifically have gotten if I didn't demonstrate that lesson
Right.
out there and use that humor.
Right.
So that's something like at the time it's like a latent humor. At the time he didn't like it.
It doesn't make sense.
But it didn't make sense initially. But after it was broken down, after the lessons was given, he started to laugh because he was like, "I see what you was doing."
Right.
And then eventually he ended up getting more Skittles than anyone else because he got his own personal bag, and that's how he learned through that humor situation. And everybody else laughed in the room as well.
That's interesting. It's almost ironic as well, considering when you think about humor and you think about laughter, you think about like comedians, where people are paying to go see a comedian, where it's kind of expected that you're going to end up laughing, but laughter or humor oftentimes is something that is unexpected, meaning you weren't expecting it to come. So in a situation like that, where you said somebody wasn't expecting you to kind of come out of that or have that type of character, in the end they found it funny because of getting the point or kind of getting the picture of what you were trying to illustrate. So our question is, and for the purpose of the study is, do you feel as though things like that, do they enhance engagement in the classroom and in workshops? And do you believe that using those type of techniques, did you see that person again? Were they more likely to come back to another men's ministry?
Yes, I think it does. I think using humor does enhance learning within a workshop or even within the classroom. And the reason why I say that is because when I use that humor, that young man will never forget that lesson that I taught him that day through that humor. You know, and as I come back to him, he always thanked me for giving him the Skittles, but it wasn't about the Skittles. It was about the lesson. And he came back consistently. And most people wouldn't will be scared to do a lesson like that because they're afraid that somebody would walk out or be like, "Well, you treat me the wrong
That's
way."
interesting that you say that, because when we talk about humor as well, we say that there's certain things that you kind of gotta watch to not be too offensive. So it's almost like you're bordering a thin line almost. So if you could think about that in the work that you do, think about how some professors use that on a daily basis, where they have to monitor themselves and be mindful of when not to push the envelope and when not to go too far. Speaking on that, what type of last advice would you give for educators and for instructors or anybody interested in more work like this in terms of how they want to, keep up student engagement as well as retention for them to remember course material? What type of last advice would you give?
What advice I would give is simply to keep them engaged, use humor. Humor is a great way than just compared to just coming in and just doing a regular lecture. And humor will allow people to be able to understand things at a higher level and retain things at a higher level because it creates a moment that they'll never forget.
Right. I appreciate that. Well, we want to thank you for being a part of the study. If you are interested in receiving some of the follow-up work or seeing where the study goes, definitely reach out to us, reach out to the professor, and we'll go from there. So I appreciate you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you're trying to gain the respect of your peers and your comrades and stuff like that in different classrooms and on campus, what are some things that you did while maybe campaigning or even just being a student leader? How do people remember you as it relates to humor or something funny that people kind of see when they think about Western Hip?
Oh, well, it's funny that you should mention that. I actually ran half of my campaign on humor because I know jokes are memorable and they stay in your head. And I know that learning growing up, teachers make jokes with me, and I remember the information better because of the joke. So someone can say a
Right.
quick joke and I remember the information. So I failed to mention that I was a member of Student Government Association. I was the treasurer for the school.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, I ran as the Wolf of Dell State. If you've seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, it's a town play on words, but people laughed at the flyer because I think it was Leonardo DiCaprio.
Mm-hmm.
I took his face out and put my face there. So you can't miss that. So that ties people. Oh well, yeah, that's the one from The Wolf of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know nothing about me, but the joke made people remember that, and I put the joke with some type of substance. That's another thing. You can't have joke without no substance. Because
Right.
I believe there's a truth to every joke. So yes, I'm running as the Wolf of Dell State, but the reason why is because I'm trying to be the treasurer. So that's the truth behind it. I believe humor got me far because the humor, that's myself. I believe to be personally funny. So if I'm going to be myself, that's one thing you need to remember when you're campaigning, to be yourself.
Okay, so thank you for meeting with me today. Can you just introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Camus Boynton. I am an academic advisor in the College of Art, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and I'm also an adjunct professor for the English department and the Department of History and Political Science and Law Studies.
Okay, so the reason why I chose to interview you was because I had you for speech and you were very funny and a lot of people think you're funny. So I think you would be perfect for my interview. And the first question is, do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and or learning? How so?
Yes, I believe it's absolutely helpful and effective. I think it's essential to sort of infuse humor into teaching because it makes subject matter relative, or rather relevant and relative, and it also sort of breaks the ice between the instructor and the student audience. I also think that it helps the class time go by in a much quicker fashion, and it helps students remember things. It engages them in a much better way than just lecturing.
And can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
You're asking about like specific instances?
Well, like any observation or like a story or anything.
Sure, I think what I would probably say is when I teach speech, for example, and we do narrative or storytelling type speeches, I've always tried to include a funny narrative or a funny story about myself, my childhood, my family, my relationship with my wife. So then that helps the students sort of feel okay about sharing their own experiences, and when they laugh, they sort of see me not just as their teacher who's there to give them this subject matter, but as a real person with real experiences. And then they say, okay, well, all right, Mr. Boynton told us something funny about himself. It makes it easier for them to share. And sometimes they not only share things that may be funny or comical, but some things that are very poignant, personal, and intimate.
And can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach in the humorous story, joke, or media, like a picture, cartoon, video, etc.?
We want to give the right answer, but literature isn't about the right answer. And so when I use humor in the classroom, is to give them a more comfortable sense of me as a teacher, so that way they can feel that they can ask questions more freely and also offer opinions more freely without judgment in the classroom. And so also sometimes I'll say jokes or talk to myself and see if they respond. So I'll say things like, you know, I'm on my 7th husband, and then they'll say, what, you're on your 7th husband? And I'll say, no, I just wanted to see if you all were listening. You're just sitting there, you know, nodding off or something. And so that's how I use humor. Not necessarily with text or pictures or props or anything, but more with how I approach the classroom to make it a very comfortable space.
And do you believe that teaching this topic with humorous content improves either your teaching or your students' learning of that content?
I think it does, because it allows students to take risks with how they are interpreting the text. That way they can look at it in all kinds of ways and offer new ways with without judgment, and we can come to a collective understanding of the text. And sometimes I'll use humor when looking at text. So if a student starts to say something but then doesn't know how to go on, I'll say, this is a race, so pass the baton to somebody. And so, you know, they'll pass the baton, not a real baton,
Right.
to another student in the classroom. And so that way it also makes it feel like we're a team together, you know, and not there's only one person in the classroom that's a star, and
Right.
then, you know, I don't know as much as the other person.
And can you please provide any detail that is important?
I do think so. And I think that humor gives instructors, it does a couple things for them. One, I think that it helps to create a positive, fun, engaging learning environment. I think that it shows the students that you're an approachable person, that you are a person, that you have emotions like everybody else, that, you know, you find humor in some things. And so it makes, I think, as an instructor, it makes you more relatable to students. I think that humor can be appropriately used in teaching methods because learning, the basis of learning is just finding a way to associate new information to something that you already know or have already experienced. And so to be able to retain that information, to really learn it over the long term, you need to be able to associate that with something. I think that if you're laughing or having fun, you know, students are able to tap into those good feelings, and you know, maybe if you tell a particular joke, they say, I remember when Mr. Stewart told that joke, I was thinking these thoughts about this topic. And so I think it helps them associate it with something if they have no other means of associating it with previously learned knowledge.
Okay, and can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, beyond just creating a positive learning environment and making the instructor more relatable, I think that it gives the students a means of being able to interact. You know, if you're just an instructor that likes to show a PowerPoint and very monotone read exactly what's on the screen, you're not really asking the students to engage. They're not participating in learning themselves. And so by giving them things that they're supposed to find funny or supposed to find humorous, that makes them think about why is it that this is funny? You know, is the punchline, does it catch them off guard? You know, is this humor that's appropriately timed, and so it makes them pay attention? I think those are some of the observations that I've found humor and or, you know, jokes to help really engage students.
And can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and the humorous story, joke, or media you have used to teach it?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned that I teach some non-credit classes here. I teach group swim lessons for little kids, and when we get to learning how to swim the breaststroke, the kick for that looks a lot like frogs' legs. So I could just tell students, make your legs look like a frog when they swim. Or I could tell them the story about the wide-mouthed frog. And the Reader's Digest version of this story/joke goes that the wide-mouthed frog is hopping around where he lives, asking a bunch of different jungle animals what their favorite food is. And he's so proud that he's a wide-mouthed frog until he finds Mrs. Crocodile, who eats wide-mouthed frogs. Mr. Frog says, "Oh, you don't see many of those around here, do you?" With his lips puckered and pursed, real small, because he's about to be eaten, right? So I find that the little kids in the swim lessons, they're paying attention, wide eyes, listening to Mr. Frog and what's going on. Meanwhile, I'm swimming along the pool, doing the kick like a frog would kick. They're watching me intently. And what I've done is I've captured their attention. For that moment, they're totally enamored with what's going on in the story, not even realizing that they're learning exactly how they want their legs to go.
Right.
I'm not telling them, keep your ankles together, bend your knees in, then spread your legs apart far,
Right.
and then whip them together real fast, which is how you would tell somebody to do the whip kick. I'm showing them the whip kick while they listen to my story. You wouldn't believe how many students, after listening to the Wide-Mouthed Frog story, hop right in, grab a kickboard, and just start doing the whip kick
And do
like
it on
they've
their own.
always
Yeah.
done it their entire life.
That's good. Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching or your students' learning of that content?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it engages students.
and or learning. How so?
Yes. I think that humor is useful in teaching and training because if you can make someone laugh, they could think back to it, and remember, okay, she told a joke about this, or she made me laugh about this, so that's how I remember to do that.
Okay, good response. Another question I would like to ask you is, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and
around just having fun, just to make sure that keep everybody's spirits up, and yes, it's hard work, but we can have fun at work too. So, and then one of the things I taught my staff is the hierarchy of the office, and I used to say supervise. Like when I was talking about myself, just certain things I would tell my staff, or just mess around, singing around the office, just little silly things like that.
Okay, supervise. All right. So, is there anything else that you would like to?
We believe that humor is very essential while teaching and helping kids retain information, because when there is humor, there is a little bit of relaxation in the student's mind. They tend to try to retain the materials more. So yes, I do believe that humor is very important in the classroom setting.
Okay. Well, I would also like to ask you, have you ever observed humor being used in a classroom setting or any type of teaching setting, or even with you, that you believe that may have helped you understand some information or another student understand some information?
Yes, I definitely have. Being a native French speaker, I've never really spoken English until I came to the United States. So I did have a teacher who used humor frequently to help me understand some of the words and basically learn English as a whole. So every single time she would read certain books to me, and she would try to explain what the book is saying, but to help me understand a lot of the words and the materials, she would really try to use a lot of humorous acts and funny faces and voices to help me retain, and it definitely did help me. It took me like a year and a half, and I was starting to speak English pretty fluently, so yeah, it definitely did help me.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's a good story. I would also like to ask you, since you did say that you're a tutor on Delaware State University campus, when you teach your tutees how to learn the material of French, what specific example can you give us of how you use humor?
Okay, so like I said earlier, so my teacher, she did help me a lot with her humorous acts, so I tried to use that a lot in my tutoring sections to help the students retain some of the information. So I used pretty much the same strategies that she used with me. So I try to use like funny noises, funny words and things like that. So for instance, I have a word, it's called tableau, right? So tableau is actually a board that you actually write on. A lot of students, they don't know how to say tableau correctly. However, they do have oral presentations that they do have to give, and they need this word, they need to say these words. So one way I try to get them to understand and remember to say the word correctly is, saying in a deeper voice. So I try to say tableau, and I keep repeatedly say it to them, and I try to get them to continuously say it back to me. So often we would just sit there, and the whole time we'll keep saying tableau, tableau for a lot of times, and I try to make certain funny faces. It's kind of gonna be kind of ugly, but I say tableau a lot in to them in a deeper voice and in a funny voice. So like, say a student is still not getting it, I'll try to like get this really mean, not a mean face, but like a strong face, and I'm just like tableau, like just keep saying it, and they try, and I noticed that they start to get it from time to time as I keep doing that. So that's definitely one good example that I try to use a lot with my students. Try to use funny voices and funny face expressions to help them retain the information. So
Okay. Well, that sounds great. And I would also like to ask you, uh, with you doing those funny facial expressions and with you doing the funny put on campus, a specific example of how when you teach students a difficult material, how you use humor in order for them to get it.
I guess a specific example would be that if we're going over, say, psychological disorders, I will try to act them out, but like without telling them. So like out of nowhere, I'll just like, if it's like schizophrenia that we're going over, I'll just be like, "Did you hear that?" And then I'll start like looking around, and then they'll be like, "What are you talking about? I didn't hear that." And I would just be like, "Oh, okay, never mind. Don't worry about it." And then they'd be like, "Well, you heard that, right?" And they'd be like, what's going on?" And then it would like get like, they would just completely be confused and be like, "What is going on? What's wrong?" And I'd be like, and I would like get up and like go hide like my folder, and I'd be like, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'd be like, "Oh, they're gonna find it. I don't want them to find it." You know, be paranoid, and then eventually they'll understand that I'm acting out the symptoms that we're trying to go over. And a lot of times they laugh and they're like, "Oh, I'm definitely not gonna forget this now." So I try to like, you know, do it without them knowing and like have them figure it out. And it's definitely been effective.
Okay. I can see many students as they're being taught about schizophrenia, maybe finding that to be hysterical because it's something that was
To hear the teacher come back and say that you did very well with your daycare child.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to say to conclude using humor in teaching?
I think each child is different. Each group that I do know since I've been doing daycare has been different. One style is not something that you are going to get used to. You always have to know who you have in your group to be able to teach properly and well, that they learn. One group may learn in puppet style, one group may learn in reading style, one group may learn in sound style. You just have to know who you have and allow your mind to expand as well as the children's minds to expand.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for sharing your time to do this interview, to contribute to this research. All right.
You're welcome. And thank you.
For learning, and how so?
I definitely feel as though that using humor with my teaching method is very effective. It's very vital. It's very important. And the reason why I feel that way is because it definitely creates a comfort for the student, but also when you use humor and you use it the right way while you're teaching, it definitely can draw in the listeners or the students' attention and create an environment or atmosphere, for them to want to learn more, ask questions, and things of that nature.
Okay, very, very, very good answer. I agree with you. On that. Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
I've worked with students, and with their English, we went over Shakespeare. And with practicing Shakespeare, of course, when it comes to the times, it's definitely a lot different from today, back then. And the word choice and grammar, everything of that nature is definitely a lot different. So I know, for example, when we were going over a part where Romeo and Juliet were having a little love scene, the little love moment when he was pursuing her, we had to sort of kind of use some slang. We had to put some slang in there and kind of, make it relatable. So, yo baby, yo, all that, but with just little things like he could say, "Hey, yo, Juliet," instead of saying, "Where art thou?" "Where you at?" Just like little simple things that, the students found kind of amusing because it was different and they were able to be themselves, and it was a lot of fun.
Okay, but how could you give me an example of like how humor was something that you observed, not pertaining to what you may have taught, but what someone may have taught you, or you may have seen someone get taught, and it helped them understand it?
Definitely. When it comes to math, I do a little game with students when it comes to using the quadratic formula, but it's something that I learned when I was in high school, and it was really hard to remember it. Because it's like so many different steps. And I'll never forget my teacher, the way she helped us, is she created a song, but she got up there and she was dancing, right? oh my goodness, I had like a whole skit, like she was a country singer. And she was trying to act out this whole entire like skit about how she was from the Wild West and she was teaching math to the outlaws in the jail, and she had a whole song together, and she was dressed up for class that day, and it was so amusing. And because of that, it just really like drew in my attention, like it really caught my attention. Made me just really catch on to it because of the humor, being able to laugh and joke around. It was something that stuck in my mind, and I was always able to remember it and laugh about it at the same time. So, yes.
Okay, and to go back to the question I asked you before, could you explain how you teaching your students, because you did say you taught them.
Hi, I'm here to tell you about a time when I taught and I chose to use humor when I was teaching. What I would do each month is choose a story that we were working on in reading, and for reading comprehension I would make it more exciting and I would dress up as the character from the story. My favorite was always obviously The Cat in the Hat, just because I love Dr. Seuss, and I'm here to answer these questions for you. Do I believe that using humor in my teaching is helpful for teaching or learning, and how so? I believe, yes, that it is a huge attention getter. I think it pulls the kids in and the students in learning what they want, something that's exciting. It makes them want to learn. It makes them interested into what is being taught. It's not very boring. It makes them more excited. Number 2, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching? What comes to mind when I think of teaching and humor, I think of Bill Nye the Science Guy, and I don't know why, but I think he's such an excellent tool, an excellent teacher when it comes to science. It would always draw me in something that you don't really understand, because science can be a hard subject to teach. But he always would incorporate different jokes. He would always incorporate different things in his teachings that would just bring the viewers in. And it would make one want to learn more. It would teach us on a different level that would help others understand science in an exciting way. The specific example of the topic that I teach and the humorous story would mostly be every month I would dress up as that certain storybook character. I'd get all dolled up. I'd do my hair, wear the outfit, everything. And it would help them, draw them into wanting to be the characters in the story, wanting to discuss the story, and it would build their reading comprehension. So it was very exciting. It helps them relate to the story that's being taught, so they feel like they're actually in the story. Do I believe that teaching this topic with humorous content improves my teaching or the students' learning? Of course.
No, I couldn't give you an example. I will say this, because students don't like to hear me sing, like when they do something such as use their cell phone, I always do my imitation of Drake. You know, you used to call me on your cell phone, and they don't like, so that reinforces the thought that you're not supposed to be having your cell phone on in class. So.
Okay, can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach in the humorous story, joke, or media you have used to teach it? Is helpful for teaching and or learning, and how so?
For me, it depends on what phase that I'm teaching. In school, humor is definitely necessary because you need to learn how to break the ice with the kids. A good ground for teachers is to find a common ground with all of the students, to be able to get all of the students to participate and respond before you go into your daily lesson. Also, you want to get feedback and response from the kids during that period to see where their mind at and see where they are at that particular time, so you can see how you need to lead into your lesson.
Okay. So can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
Sure. The environment that I teach in, you know, kids come from so many different walks and environments that it's necessary to find that common ground. And I think as a teacher, finding that common ground makes it easier for you to be able to, reach out to the kids for your daily lesson. Kids just like adults, have a tendency to respond to humor. Everyone likes to laugh. Everyone likes to have fun. Students, I found out, have a difficult time when they feel that a teacher is uptight and always about the business. Kids, on the other hand, if they find a little humor in the things that you're teaching or the way that you're teaching, they have more of a tendency to participate, and they have more of a tendency to give you their attention to learn.
Okay, so can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach in a humorous story, joke, or media you have used to teach it?
I can give you an example from today. We were sitting around talking with the kids in the shop, and for some reason we started talking about subs, like subs you buy at Subway. But my co-teacher and I, we started using different terminology of what. Before we told them, let me back up. Before we told them what we were doing, we were just using different terminology for the word sub. So we use submarine, we use po' boy, and we asked the kids, do you know what a submarine is? And it was funny that the kids said submarine is a ship that sails on the water, and we just thought that was hilarious. We asked them about a po' boy. It was like a po' boy, I see po' boys every day where I come from, and we thought that was hilarious. So we even asked the kids, well, do you know what a pop is? And all of the kids didn't know what a pop was. And these are 7, 8, 7th through 12th graders. It was funny because we had to come back and explain to them that a lot of words have a lot of words are the same or different words but have the same meaning. And we had to explain to them what a submarine was. It was basically a sub at Subway, the same with a po' boy, depending on what part of the United States you were living in. And that some people even, you go to a different state, you may order a Coke, and they may ask you, well, what type of Coke you want? What do you want, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, or whatever the case may be. So we just thought it was funny, the fact that these kids couldn't relate these words together to be able to come up with a common ground meaning without us having to explain it to them. So, I mean, I know that's not funny as in a joke per se, but it was the reality of how much work us teachers still have to encounter to do as well as the parents.
Okay. Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching?
Running. So, with that being said, for the remainder of the season, no one was ever late again because she ended up running for at least 2 hours.
Okay. So, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and/or learning?
Repeat that.
Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and/or learning?
I've learned not only as a former coach, but a former academic person that humor tends to keep the attention of the person versus different teaching styles, whether or not you're like monotone or you're expressionist in your teaching. That tends to keep the attention of the people that you're teaching.
Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach in a humorous joke, story, or media picture you have used to teach it?
Teaching the proper way of sit to passing volleyball. What we have done in the past where we put chairs out and the person had to sit on the chair. Without that person knowing, the person tend to get comfortable in sitting. So what we would do is just randomly go past the person and pull the chair from under that person. So if you fail or you fall on the floor, you have to end up staying in that position for a long period of time so you learn how to sit properly when passing the ball.
That's mean. Alright, do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content?
Hello everyone, I'm Jalen Drennan and I am a tutor for finance.
Okay. So do you believe that that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and or learning, and how so?
Do I believe that humor is useful? Yes, absolutely. I think that we wouldn't get through the days or the process if there wasn't a little bit of humor. I mean, sometimes you just have to relax and like take the weight off your shoulders with a little laugh. What was the next part of that question?
Said how so?
Oh, yes. Okay, so, well, with my students, it's only like 7 or 8 because not everyone's interested in finance. But what I do is, like, you know, if they get like a problem wrong, I'll be like, oh, well, when I first started learning finance, like, I got everything wrong. And they'll just laugh, like, yeah, I wasn't as smart as I was now. You know, I mean, look smart. I'm not that smart, though, but yeah.
Okay, so can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
Oh, okay. So how can humor improve teaching or learning? Let's
Any
see.
observations?
Any
stories?
Yes. Okay. So what I do when I tutor at Dover High School. So I give them like weekly quizzes, but it's only like 5 questions of what I said the week before. So it's nothing serious, but and it's not like really graded. I just give it to the teacher so she'll know. So what I do is from the jokes that or not the jokes per se, but like the funny things that I said about finance the week prior, on the test the next week, I'll put like those jokes or those like statements that I made referring to the question. So that way they remember like, oh my God, I remember she said like she didn't pass all her finance tests, so this is the question that she's talking about. So that kind of like leaves a memory, like, or leaves a trail, so that when they answer the question, humor comes back and it's not like they're so serious. They're like, oh, I remember this, but they're laughing and getting the question right at the same time.
Okay, so can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and a humorous story, joke, or media you have used to teach it?
Let me see. Okay, so I teach finance. Well, I don't teach finance. I go over finance with the students. A funny time. What was the question?
Yes. Can you give a specific example of a topic you teach and a humorous story, joke, or media you have used to teach it?
Oh, yes. You know what a funny one is? It's not even funny, but like people like to talk about how big my line is for my license. So I use that all the time. Like I always use my sisters. Like I have 47 sisters, okay? So like for the finance part, I'll be like, I have 47 sisters. Like, how many siblings do you have? But they're like, oh, I have 2 or 3. Okay, sorry. So say I have 47 car payments and you had like 2 or 3 years to pay those car payments. How you gonna pay it? Like, what you gonna do? And they'll be like, what? Miss Jalen, 47 car payments in 2 to 3 years? How do you expect to do that? So it's like a whole fake argument. I'm just like, you know, this is a real world. Like, I'm an adult. You guys are gonna be an adult within a few years. So how are you gonna pay these car payments? So it makes them think like, oh my God, like this is real life. So then they start like, think like real life, 47 car payments. Like, yo, that's too much money. So I'll be like, the payments are $20 a piece. Okay, so you have to do 47 times 20, then you have to do it by the 2 or 3 years. So with that, like, I think that's really funny because it's like a joke. Like, nobody's gonna have 47 car payments. If you do, why you got 47 cars? You know, why would you do that? So it's just like really funny when they can like use like a fake story, but like it's with numbers and it's like car payments, so that's finance, what they're going to be working with. So I think that's a funny time, and that's a funny story that happened. My sister's in the car payments.
So do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching or your students' learning of that content?
I do, because I'm a goofy person. So like I like to have fun.
Media you have used to teach it?
I like to relate my class, my lessons in gym to cartoons. So I kind of use like different cartoons that actually help the students relate to me or find it funny. So I kind of use SpongeBob for the stretches, just little things that actually have them more into it, I guess.
Can you give an example?
Example is like when SpongeBob was in a cartoon, he was yelling, bringing around town in one of the episodes. So I use that as one of the examples of a stretch in the class, and little kids find it, hilarious.
Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching or your students?
Right. A list of 1,000 reasons of what makes them nervous. And so again, humor just kind of takes that edge off of it for them.
Is there can you give me like a real specific example like that you always use?
The golf analogy is always one that I use. And a lot of people find that I've put Princess Bride comics into it.
Right.
So if if you're familiar with Princess Bride, he's like inconceivable, and so that's actually in there when you get a wrong answer. And so a lot of students get a good chuckle out of that, especially the ones that know where it's coming from.
Right.
Ones that don't, I have to explain it, and then but then after that they kind of get that.
All right. Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching experience or your students' learning of the concept?
I really think it's for the students. I enjoy humor. You see, I have toys on my shelf. I like humor. I think I have a good sense of humor. Sometimes a little childish, but for the most part, and I think I like to do that. It lets me be me, which makes me more comfortable as the instructor.
Right.
But at the same time, it really, I think, it, again, takes the edge off. When students feel like you're comical or have some comedy to you, they want to relate a little bit better to it, or they like your comedy, or it just lets you really kind of bond with them on a human level, not necessarily a teacher-student. You have to learn this.
The humor makes it easier for students to come to class?
Definitely. I think they want to show up because it's kind of like, well, what's he going to do today?
Exactly.
I think that does add to it. So that makes attendance a little easier on them.
Right.
Or it gives them a reason to show. I like to leave cliffhangers as well, so we'll work problems and they won't give answers.
Right.
That helps because then they want to come back to find out what that answer is going to be.
Exactly.
So those types of things definitely help.
All right. So can you provide any detail that's important for a potential viewer of your reflections to be able to understand it? Should your reflections be included in our final products?
Well, I guess
that's basically like a wrap up. I don't know why they worded it so long.
I guess I mean, if I were a budding instructor and I was just going to start out, I would try to incorporate humor. Humor definitely can have. I mean, there can be disadvantages because if your humor is not the same as the students,
you're on two different pages.
Yeah, you're on two different pages. You'll see the difference. You'll see it in their face. So some of that comes with experience and learning. Like, okay, that joke's not funny anymore. Maybe not use that one next semester. My crowd's getting too young for that joke, or whatever it might be.
Right.
But for the most part, yeah, I think trying to stay up on things too. I try to, keep up with some of the latest humor, different television shows that are humor based.
Right.
And when you can incorporate that, anything that relates me to them, I think is probably what is real important. Okay. So if I'm on the same page with them outside of here, they see that I'm as a human rather than just as he's a smart guy or he's that guy or he's the. It's or more like he's no better than me.
One of the other professors, she was like, it kind of puts you guys on a level platform.
It does.
Instead of people going, oh, he's the teacher.
Exactly. Yeah. It does. And at this level, that's, I think.
And some of them were just plain funny. Like one said something about what's the price of milk in your area, and the answer was a yes or no. And so things like that can be very helpful as far as that goes. And that was a content related one.
Right.
Critical thinking, it was a lot easier because, especially when we did the inductive and deductive reasoning, because a lot of the things were like that. And what I've tried to do a little bit in pre-calc is when we talk about conjectures and counterexamples and things like that, that give them a real world base, a little bit more like the kind of stuff that we did with the inductive and deductive and have it not make sense.
Right.
And just like an everyday management thing that cracks them up is also when they have the earphones on, I'll be like, I cannot hear you with your earphones. And it's one of those humorous things that cracks up and they got to think about, but it just breaks the ice.
Double negative.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Because they got them on and they can't hear me. But just something like, so I use it like in classroom management and then in the content if I can.
All right. Can you give like a specific example of a topic you teach in a humor story? Like,
well, the statistics was one of them, and I'm trying to think. It's so much harder with the pre-calc and the algebra.
Right.
Those are the tough ones to do. Statistics. I don't know if you would call it humor, but I gave them different things to read about the normal curve, and the normal distribution, and one did not make sense and the other did make sense, and they had to kind of figure out, like, they were just, the one that didn't make sense was silly, and it was like a little article, and they had to kind of figure out why they were the same, like what which one was valid and which one wasn't. So that's another example besides like that misleading graphs, which we had a lot of fun with the misleading graphs. That one was fun.
What is like one of the or a couple of the reasons why you believe in using humor in the classroom?
Because the kids, especially in math, are uptight about it. They're afraid right off the bat.
Okay.
Now, it was so much more fun like when I had you and we did critical thinking and even number theory. It was a lot more fun because the topics lent themselves to do that. We could explore a lot of things and look at it and think, wow, that doesn't really make sense. But I think especially with like the way the kids are now, they're not as well prepared walking into the algebra courses for whatever reason. And you just need to break the ice. And if you can have them look at even the content a little bit less seriously, they're more willing to
be
learn
open
it,
to it,
to learn it.
Okay.
Exactly. And it definitely works with classroom management. I will tell you that for sure.
Yeah.
Like to go in, like being like saying something silly, like I can't hear you when your earphones are on, or something like that. That it instead of saying take your earphones off, you get a completely different reaction.
Exactly.
So for classroom management, it's really key. For content, I think it breaks the ice a lot. So you can, Amaya, you're gonna have to wait till I'm done here, and then I'll get one out. Okay.
Can you provide any detail that is important for a potential viewer of your reflections to be able to understand?
Too. So, say for example, I think the first question is I think what it does is it really keeps the students, the culture in the classroom a little bit less. It's more lighthearted. You know, it's still serious. We're all about learning. What did I write down? I wrote down, a more relaxed learning environment.
Kind of like breaks the ice, basically.
Right. That's an icebreaker, daily icebreaker. You know, kids come in with a lot of outside, issues that they're dealing with, and sometimes, adding a little, humor or interjecting a little levity into the situation can add a lot, allow them to open up and relax and kind of. I always believe that like, if you it's just the opposite of like getting in someone's face or being super serious. They build the wall. You know, it's just a natural reflex.
Authoritative.
Right. If you're being authoritative, everyone's going to naturally build the wall and then respond in kind, right?
Exactly.
But if you don't, if you're just the opposite, then the wall doesn't have to come up. And I think that for a teacher or anyone who wants to make a point, you don't want to let that wall come up.
Exactly.
So I think in that case, and also, I think it's good because it keeps students' attention on you. So you never know when the next crazy comment's going to come up. If I'm going to try to mispronounce John or, some things that the kids use that there just sounds comical coming out of the teacher's mouth.
It does.
It does lend. It just makes my job easier.
Right. So can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching or learning?
Yeah. If you're looking for a specific one, I kind of gave that at number 3, but.
Well, that's fine. You can give me an example now.
I just think that like we were just talking about, it makes the teacher feel less authoritative, more of a facilitator of learning. So then there's less like I'm just going to tell you what you need to know versus they start to ask more questions.
Exactly.
The mentality in the class is a little bit looser. They don't feel like there's a bad question, and then off those questions, you can build a lot of learning from. So in that case, I think that like it's not just humor. It's just your personality. Your personality, easygoing personality, lends itself to just easier in general in life. For anything, any profession. So like in here, I wrote down in my notes. I said it opens minds so they're not so defensive and. But like I said before, some of it's just unconscious. I would be doing it anyway if I didn't believe it.
Because that's your personality.
It's a personality.
Exactly.
Very quirky. Although you have to be, if you're going to become a teacher or anyone who wants to take you serious, you really have to. It's a fine line when you balance those things. You have to make them understand that this isn't something that is something that you do all the time or at home or anything. It's just kind of lighten the mood. Otherwise. Then I think you lose a little bit of credibility. If you're trying to be like, who's a comedian off the top of my head? I can't even think of one.
Kevin Hart.
Kevin Hart. If you're trying to be Kevin Hart all the time, then they're not going to take anything you say seriously.
Exactly.
So there is always a fine line when it comes to that, especially in teaching, and then of course in any profession.
So you got to find the balance.
Exactly.
All right. So do you have any like specific examples of like a story, joke, or something that you use all the time?
Well, all the time. I do try to catch them. After a while, when I just say it, they know what's coming. But I'll either deal in absolutes, or I will say something like, you know what, this is why I love this class. This is my smartest 8th period class I've had all year.
I feel like I remember you saying that when I was here.
So then, you know, and then there's always one kid who's really not dialed in. They're like, really? You really like us the best? I thought? And then someone else has to kind of, you know, smack him up the side of the head and say, look, he just said, you know, and it's kind of a play on words. As a civics teacher, they got to understand that, like, you know, you can use words, and you can say a lot of things, but you're really not saying anything.
Exactly.
But they're like, he just said this class this year. He's not saying we're the best. It's just 8th period. He only has one 8th period. You know, you realize that, right? So I do things like that, and I try to interject. You know, as a teacher, you hear other words that kids use.
Right.
Like we were talking about before, I sometimes I'll interject those words into my teaching, and it just sounds comical, you know, and the kids think it's hilarious. That, you know, some old teacher is using the word John and then mispronouncing it, and then they try to teach me how to say it. And I do use it in my teaching. So one thing that we just did just recently, because we were just talking about the presidency and like what the president can do and different things like informal powers of the president. We were talking about executive orders. But before I started it, I said, this is a skit from SNL. And it was a skit where, and I don't know the guys' names, but do you know I don't know if I ever played it for you guys, but this is a separate one where the Schoolhouse Rocks, where they sing about, like, there's one about the kid goes to Washington and it's how to make a bill.
I'm not sure if I'm.
Well, the kid goes, and then it's in song. So it's in song, and how to make a bill, and then there's literally like a piece of paper that's following him around. It's like, oh, I'm hoping to get into committee, and talks about the whole process from the bill's perspective. Well, SNL did a skit about that, where they were kind of giving Obama a hard time about how many executive orders he's put out, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. He was in, he was in a show called Kenan and Kel. Kind of a heavy-set African-American kid.
I know who you're talking about from Saturday Night Live.
He's in Saturday Night Live, and he was a Bill. So he's all dressed up like a Bill. And there's a guy who was dressed up like Barack Obama. And then there was a kid who had like the same shirt on, and he was so excited. He's like, oh, this is how you make a bill. And then the young man was, the gentleman we were just talking about, who looks like a Bill. Was like, you know, don't listen to him. You know, we do really important stuff, and then he's just pushing him down the stairs, and so, I mean, that's just one that I thought of on the top of my head. But you know, I used to have kids when I could have more leeway in my classes. I would have kids, you know, create little.
All right. So my name is Tajon Stewart, and I'm part of doing a research experiment on how teachers use humor in the classroom. And do you introduce yourself for me?
My name is Calvin Griffin. I am a graduation coach / project coordinator at Wilmington High School for Community Schools of Delaware.
All right. So for the first question, we want to ask: do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching or learning, and how so?
I believe humor can be very helpful in the teaching process as long as it's used the right way and in the proper situation. Sometimes humor can set a kid off, so you don't want to end up upsetting the kid, and then that causes your classroom to lose its focus, and it gets a negative vibe. But when you use it at the right timing, and it lets the kids know that you are funny, but yet you're serious, but can still be funny at the same time, and it can get the subject matter while that's happening, it's a great tool for you.
All right. Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching or learning?
Well, I think what comes to my mind when you say that is when we did a little lesson when we had this kids tell a story, and then everyone had to tell the story until they got to the end, and how the story changed. People were just laughing at how the story changed so much, it just became funny to them, and they were learning how a rumor can hurt people. So
Right.
they got a lesson
Okay.
out of it.
So, can you give a specific example of a topic you teach and the humorous story, joke, or media or cartoon that you use to teach it?
Well, when I taught life skills and job skills, I would use news journal, things like that in there.
News journal?
Yeah.
Can you go into detail of like one example?
Well, like the comics and things like that. So you see things about a teacher, whether it be a teacher student. So when they relate something like that, you're like, oh, so teacher can be fun and be serious at the same time. Same thing I said earlier.
Okay. Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching experience or the students' learning of the content?
Yes, absolutely can, because if the students can feel that you are human, not just a robotic teacher, they're going to grasp what you're trying to teach them.
Right.
That's what you're trying to get
All right.
across.
So, can you provide any detail that's important for a potential viewer of your reflections?
I would say to them, and I've seen this happen in many classes, if you use negative humor that puts you up and takes them down, you absolutely fail. So make sure your humor is something that we all can relate to and we can laugh at and be done with it, not that it will stick to a student's feelings and heart.
All right, thank you. We'd like to thank you so much for your participation. We appreciate you sharing something so important to you and your willingness to help us with this research.
No problem, thank you.
All right, so my name is Tajon Stewart, and I'm part of a study on how teachers use humor in the classroom and how it affects the students and the teachers. So can you introduce yourself for me?
My name is Kai Mall. I am a first-year teacher of Business Essentials and Marketing at William Penn High School in Newcastle, Delaware.
All right. So for the first question, we'd like to know if you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and or learning, and how so?
I believe it's helpful. I consider myself to not necessarily be a comedian, but I have a sense of humor.
Right.
I think that using humor throughout your lessons and working with your students sort of, I guess, helps with the environment. Some students, depending on the topic or the subject, are very nervous.
Right.
Some people struggle with just being in the atmosphere, educational atmosphere, and taking tests and being around their peers. Some are fearful of participating because they think they may say something silly or dumb or
Right.
considered stupid. So at times, though, it's a little difficult to, necessarily bring up a specific, piece of humor that I use in my lesson. But, I try to show the lighter side of a situation. I use some things that are going on in pop culture that the students can relate to.
Right.
In my marketing class, what I've done a lot is I refer to what you might consider sneakerheads. So I have a lot of gentlemen in my class that are big on the Air Jordans and
Right.
All the different sneakers.
Latest LeBrons.
And so
yeah.
latest LeBrons and all those things, because
Exactly.
that's what's relevant
To
for
them.
this generation.
Yeah.
So a lot of the lessons that I incorporate in my class revolve around sports marketing of sneakers, other businesses. So we do a lot of marketing of the school store.
Right.
We market a lot of the athletic programs. We market school organizations, BPA and DECA. But to go back to the topic of the sneakers, for since incorporating humor, I might have a PowerPoint slide talking about marketing of the newest Jordan. One particular lesson that I speak of was, I think it was around Christmas time, and it was the introduction of a new sneaker.
Right.
And we'll just say, instead of coming right out and showing the main sneaker that I was going to profile, I might put up some, and I'll date myself, but I might call it some Bobos. You know what I mean? So it would be like
Right.
some crazy sneaker, and so I might highlight that shoe and put what are those, because that's something that
they say now,
they say
yeah.
on videos and Instagram, and they'll be like, what are those? So I would maybe put something like that, or incorporate some audio in the slide.
Right.
You can just sort of get the kids to see the lighter side of the lesson. They might laugh or chuckle a little bit. Mr. Maul, he's crazy. But
Right.
then from that, I'll get the attention of the class.
Exactly.
And sort of, have their attention and then go into my focus.
Right.
So that particular lesson was around Christmas time, and it was, so I mentioned the movie Space Jam, which was, a movie that some of the kids had seen, but some, they're all familiar with Michael Jordan, though I think majority of them are too young to have ever seen him play.
Right.
But, Space Jam the movie, and then we talk about from that movie from a marketing standpoint, and then we were to talk about, is it coincidence that with this movie releasing that also the Space Jam sneaker is being re-released at the same time. So, just we try to, make those connections, connect the dots in relation to those particular products, those different industries, the athletic apparel versus the movie industry.
Right.
So, that would be just something that just comes to mind in reference to a
Do you think that the kids you coach think you're funny?
I hope so.
Do they laugh at you?
Oh, absolutely, because there's going to be something sarcastic that comes out of my mouth during the game to either a kid or a possible referee. They're my favorite.
Now, have you ever felt that your jokes have gone too far, that you've been told?
No, because I know where to cut the line off
And
with the age group.
What's the line?
Obviously, when they're 10, 12, 13 years old, you need to know where the jokes are appropriate.
Can you give me an example of
No sex jokes.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. Thank you.
So, do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching hockey?
Yeah, I do think so. I think it's good, especially when you're coming into hockey, since it's such a high-stress situation. I think the fact that kids are already in school for hours upon hours during the day, they kind of start to feel kind of blah about the whole day. Yes, kind of feel blah, fade out about the whole day. Kind of want to put some excitement in their lives. Let them have fun while they're doing something they love.
Okay. So, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how you use humor to improve your teaching?
Yeah, I think, especially when we're out, doing certain drills on the ice where you're working on a certain skill, even as far as being down in the proper skating position. I'm working with 9 and 10-year-olds, and you really got to make sure that you're using the language that 9 and 10-year-olds are going to be able to grasp with their minds. So you're not going to be able to sit there and just tell them over and over again, listen, you need to bend your knees, keep your head up, do all these things, steps 1 through 4, when they've already had stuff pounded in their heads all day. So if we're going through a skating drill and I want to reinforce that they need to be down in the proper position, I'll just say, hey, listen, bend your knees. Do you guys sit on a toilet standing straight up, or do you bend your knees and get your butt down nice and low? And obviously, like, I need to get my butt down nice and low so everything makes it in the toilet. I'm like, exactly. So bend your knees, get your butt down low. You'll be all right.
All right. So, do you believe that teaching that topic, so like bending your knees to get on the toilet, do you think that helps them remember things easier and helps the concepts stay with them?
Oh yeah. I mean, we'll be out doing a drill, and if I see a kid that's not skating properly, all I have to do is yell at them, sit on your toilet, and instantly, complete 180, knees bent, down proper position, look like they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Okay. All right. Now, you said with the kids you have to talk in like a language that they'll understand. Okay. Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching?
Well, in terms of driver's ed, when we talk about drinking and driving and all that good stuff, I do refer to stories back when I was in high school and college so that kids know that I'm human. I did the same stupid stuff that they did, and I just give them funny stories and scenarios. I also make the students feel at ease to know that it's okay if you hit a cone, if you take a curve too fast, we're there to help you learn, and you just gotta relax. Everything's gonna be okay as long as you're taking in everything, but yet at the same time having fun learning and doing it.
Can you provide any examples of those college or?
Oh goodness gracious! Such how how alcohol affects your body and what it does to it, and how I explained to them how my college roommate, I found her one night, and you probably remember the story. Remember how she was peeing on our coffee table because she was intoxicated, butt naked. And it's just one of those things. You're impaired and you don't know what you're doing. And imagine if you were behind the wheel. The next weekend, I found her doing the same thing. This time she was urinating in her closet, butt naked, still being that good roommate, putting her to bed. But when I tell kids stories like this, they know I don't like fake teachers and how they come off that I'm perfect and I do no wrong, because we're not perfect and we don't do anything wrong. And especially in driver's ed, I need kids to understand that they're not invincible. In terms of also humor, I also have to have a serious side to it. My husband is a state trooper, so the running joke is I teach him to drive and then he pulls him over. He gave one of my students her, I think, third ticket, which got her 10 points on her license for going over 20 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
On the road. And it was a learning experience for her. She realized it was my husband. Then the court made her do all this other stuff. But even from that, and from me and my husband, we see her all the time, and she's like, I've learned a very valuable lesson. And you get in their head. So when you tell them different stories or tell them different scenarios, I like to think that you can get in a student's head, and there's things that they'll remember the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, one scenario.
Okay. I think that's good.
Yeah?
All right, I just wanted to start off by thanking you again for being here and coming out and doing this with me. Can you start by introducing yourself?
My name is Chester Scott Jr. I'm a teacher at Lake Forest High School, 43 years, 110 days on the job.
Okay. Do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching or the learning process?
Yes, it is.
How so?
It's helpful because students understand that teachers are human also. I want my students to be relaxed around me and treat me as a normal person and be able to engage in me every day in the classroom like I'm their mother or their father. Okay. I don't want to intimidate anybody.
Okay.
Unless I really have to.
Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching or learning?
Oh yes. It's been situations in my class where I had students come in first thing in the morning and their butt be stinking. Now I really don't want to embarrass the student in front of the whole class, so what I would do, I will make a public announcement. Somebody's butt stinking. If I smell your butt tomorrow, your name will be on the board. Now really, I'm not going to put the name on the board, but that intimidation factor of just saying that, tomorrow when they come in, their butt will be clean. And the whole class will be in an undercover situation, say, hey man, you don't wash your butt. You know the man's going to put your name on the board. You're going to be embarrassed. So we can laugh about it, but still get my point across, wash your butt.
So you use the possibility of embarrassing them.
Yes.
And everybody laughing and thinking it's funny to try to get your point across.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, send a point. You got to have a clean butt to come in my class.
So, do you believe teaching this way, the personal hygiene, teaching it in this humorous kind of possibly embarrassing way, is more effective than if you're just like, make sure you put on deodorant?
That's not going to work. I mean, not with me. I want to be able to reach the whole class and let everybody know, hey, there's a situation here, so maybe somebody just forgot. We got to take care of this personal hygiene problem and get it squared away. And then, we're going to laugh about it, but still, it's going to be corrected, and then we're going to move on.
Okay. All right. I think that answers all my questions. Thanks again. And stuff like that when you're coaching and trying to help the kids learn concepts. Do you believe using humor in this way is helpful for them to learn?
Yes, because sometimes I think kids can become overbearing on themselves and too hard and critical of their own performances. So sometimes when you introduce humor, it refocuses their mind and helps them to not take themselves so serious and not take the game so serious and realize that, hey, this is fun, not just I'm here because my parents are making me play. I'm here because I'm having fun, that I'm here with my friends, that I'm here with kids that I want to get to know and I want to learn the game. It helps them learn. It helps them learn it stimulates their mind not only just to the game but to other things too.
What about you? Do you think that it helps your teaching using humor? Do you think you're a more effective coach.
Humorous as possible, just because you want them to be comfortable with you as their new coach. And then one time we were teaching our players how to dodge around, other players, one offense versus defense, and we used chairs, like actual full-size chairs, instead of little dinky cones. And it was humorous because they would, when they wouldn't pick their head up to look around and dodge around, the obstacle, they would actually run into the chair and fall over. So it's humorous for everybody else.
It's a little bit harder to race that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching or learning.
In the past, I've used videos that wouldn't normally be used with the age group. I've used like Sesame Street to teach like vocabulary, and just the juxtaposition of showing a video that's intended for 4-year-olds to high schoolers. They think it's funny, but they really tend to buy into it more. A lot of that has to do with the fact that it's just odd that I'm showing them this, and then on top of it, they just enjoy the content that's there because it's something different. There's other things that I've done. When it just comes to humor, like I try to wrap my humor in what I'm doing, or just and put it into what I'm doing. So it's not forced, but lately I've just really developed a love of terrible puns. So, I'll be in the middle of teaching something and I'll throw a pun out there, and it just see who catches it. And some kids will get it, and some kids will take them a couple of seconds and then they'll get it, and then they'll be listening to see if they can catch more. Then beyond that, honestly, a lot of self-deprecating humor, like it just works. And I dress often flamboyantly, not loudly, but bright colors, things like that. And I'm a goof, like naturally. So it can help a lot to just keep their attention when they're like, I don't know what's going to happen next, but it's generally funny to them.
Okay. So,
my boss, I couldn't get a nut loose. So he would say, I'm like, which way would I turn it? So he said righty tighty and loose, and lefty is loose as a goose. So every time I think of loose as a goose, I would laugh at that.
Do you know of any times where you used...
For the next 20 years, and he died a natural death.
Wow.
So it's like, for me, it was a real life story that I kind of watched unfold.
Yes.
And which is why I thought it was, and I shared it with my class, and they had a good time over it. So now and then I still use it. It was a very long answer to your question.
No, that's fine. Do you believe that teaching using humor content improves either your teaching or your students' learning?
I think it does. From my point of view, from the teacher's point of view, I think it relieves some of the monotony of just going through and passing on, talking about the concepts or the lesson as it evolves. It becomes a little dry unless you have somebody who's listening at the other end who's really interested in what you have to say, but otherwise it's a constant battle to keep the other person engaged. So I think humor now and then, particularly if it's unexpected and it comes in and suddenly you think you're in a very dull spot, and then there's something funny that comes in, people start to sit up and take notice, and then they hopefully listen to the other things that you are saying. And I think from the student's point of view, having been a student myself for many years before I went to the other side of it, I think definitely the ones I remember, the teachers I remember, were the ones who didn't bore us too much, and who now and then had some interesting things to say, and ideally those things that made us laugh now and then. And I think those are more effective methods for teaching. It has to come naturally. I don't know if you can really plan this and really kind of make it a fine art, but I think you have to find humor in everyday things, and that makes it more spontaneous. So that's a bit of I think that's a requirement, probably.
Is this something that you would recommend our viewers to use?
I think so. I would say it would require probably going in with an attitude where you are still taking what you're doing very seriously, but you are also standing back from it a little bit and sort of being able to pick up on what else is happening and be able to weave that in so that it becomes part of the total experience at that point in time and maybe more effective in that way. And I think there was one more thing I was going to say. I did look at some of the work on humor some years ago, and then I looked at some more to see what more had been done. There's still people are still sort of circling around it, trying to find out what it is that makes people laugh. But I do know that humor is very effective in the classroom, and there was, I think, a lot of research to show that when students learn something where there's humor used in the classroom, they're actually able to understand difficult concepts better. They're able to remember them better. They altogether do better. And most of all, it reduces the anxiety level in certain classes where they may go in thinking that the subject matter is going to be very difficult to deal with. So I think it just lightens. Overall, it's good.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time out to let me interview you for this study.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed this.
Good morning. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dr. Brian Friel. I'm in the psychology department.
Okay, we're doing a study about how teachers use humor in their classrooms. The reason I thought of you is because I believe you have a great sense of humor. Do you believe that using humor in teaching is helpful?
Yes, I think that it gets the students' attention, certainly, and it helps provide something for them to kind of associate with the material that they're learning. They'll remember the joke, and then that kind of helps them remember what they're supposed to remember for the class.
Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and learning?
You see this a lot. Sometimes in textbooks, you'll see like a cartoon, like a Far Side cartoon usually, that's kind of included in there that illustrates something about some strange psychology concept or something along those lines. Sometimes I try to incorporate those types of things into the lectures as well.
Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach and the joke or story that you use to teach it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's exactly a joke, but it's kind of a funny situation. For my cognitive psychology class, we talk about one of the topics is change blindness, which is where people will not notice a change in the scenery. So for example, people can walk up to someone and ask for directions, and they've done demonstrations where the person will actually switch places with someone else, and the person won't really notice that actually happened. And there's a video clip I show that kind of demonstrates this in the street, in the city, and the way they kind of go about changing the person up so much, changing things like their gender, their race, and it kind of gets a good laugh about how people still don't notice the change in that happening. The audio clip itself is kind of funny because the host is he kind of tells jokes throughout it too, and that seems to get a good reaction out of people.
Do you believe that teaching this topic with this humorous content improves either your teaching or your students' learning of that content?
I think so, yeah, because with any classes, if the students are engaged in the class, the students and the teacher can kind of feed off each other and make for a better learning experience. And if students are engaged in that material, then they're going to ask better questions, and that can prompt the instructor to become more engaged themselves too.
Can you think of a time where someone used humor to help you learn something?
I'm trying to think of specific examples. I did have some pretty funny professors in college and in grad school. As far as specific examples come to mind, I'm not thinking of any at the moment.
Okay. Would you like to tell our potential viewers anything?
Anything?
About this topic, would you suggest using humor?
Yeah, sure. I think with humor, the thing is you don't want to necessarily go overboard too much, because I'm aware of some studies that were looking at, they had people would lead off the class with a joke to kind of get everyone's attention, and it actually kind of backfired in terms of their memory for the material in the class. So if it's something that's kind of unrelated to the topic, then that can be a problem. Actually, it can actually form a distraction from learning what you're supposed to learn. They just remember the joke and they kind of forget about what everything else was about. But if the joke is kind of relevant to what they're supposed to learn, then that can kind of provide that association that they're supposed to remember.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to let me interview you for our study.
Okay, no problem. Happy to help.
Good afternoon. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Kylo Brown. I'm a junior sport management major.
Can you tell me where you work and your position?
I work as a Hornet ambassador at Delaware State University.
Okay, we're doing a study about how teachers use humor in classrooms. The reason I thought of you is because you have a great sense of humor. Do you believe that using humor in teaching is helpful?
Yes, I do believe that using humor in teaching is helpful because it makes the student relate to the teacher more and understand that you don't have to be serious at all aspects of the class. While humor can make the teaching easier because it lets the student chill more and have more like a relatable impact to the teacher.
Okay, can you think of a time where someone used humor to help you learn something?
Well, I have a teacher in one of my majors, in my major, Dr. Still, where sometimes he'll joke around and he'll use key to success, which is like a humorous line that he says after every class, which makes us understand that the whole class is serious, but at times that is not the hardest thing in the world, that it can be enjoyable too, is what you make it, so it makes us laugh and enjoy the class.
Okay, can you tell me about a time where you used humor to help someone learn something?
Well, most of the time I use humor to help people learn things. When I help my classmates that we're doing group projects or we're studying together, I'll make jokes out of the work to keep their nerves calm and to help them learn faster, because if you teach them on a strict level, it makes them more subject to not learn it than to learn what they need to learn.
Okay, and do you think that this helps?
I think it does help actually, because in college you're very stressed most of the time, so if you don't have humor, then you don't have a chance to laugh, which calms down the nerves and makes everything lighter on yourself. So if you don't have a humor in classrooms or in like study sessions with anybody, it's gonna make college or anything that you're doing very harder to grasp, and the concepts are really difficult most of the time, so you need humor to understand them more and to make you realize that you don't have to be serious at all times, that joking around can help you learn it because it can keep you at peace.
Okay, do you have anything to say to our viewers or any suggestions?
Well, my suggestion is always be a humorous person, learn how to take jokes. Sometimes it's always to lighten up your mood, not to criticize you or anything, and jokes are a very great thing to have in a college atmosphere especially.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me some of your time for this interview.
Thank you. No problem. You're welcome.
Well, when I was a teacher, I believe it's very helpful. I believe that it helps the students retain information because you do remember what you laugh at. So, yeah.
Can you give me an example of a time where you use humor in your teaching?
Sure. Way back when I was a teacher, I can remember a time when I used my husband because I used him often when I tried to make the students laugh. My husband cannot skate, so we went out skating, and he did try, and he constantly kept falling, but he was getting back up, and the kids were having problems trying to get math correctly. I can't get it out.
That's okay.
And what happened, basically, I just kept falling out of the chair, and I was like, so I kept going, boop, and then I would go, boop, and they were just laughing hysterically. And I said, every time I fell out of the chair, did I get back up? And they were like, yeah, like laughing hysterically. And I said, you guys can do it. You guys can get these math problems. And I said, every time my husband fell off them skates, he got back up. So, might not be as funny to you guys, but you had to be there, so.
Do you believe it really helped them?
I do, because they all sat down and took the test.
My next question is, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and learning?
I know that I would always, because I was an English teacher before I was here at Del State, whenever I was teaching any stories, when there were jokes, sometimes the students wouldn't get them because English was their second language. So it would be a matter of explaining it and then trying to get, like, do you understand that it's a joke? Do that type of stuff. But then also, just making little jokes about kind of like what's going on, And again, the sense of humor is different in the cultures. So there, it wasn't appropriate for high school students to officially date. Mm-hmm. So if you made if there were jokes in the story about like a couple, you know, you could be like, oh, and so, he's kissing so, and all the kids would be like, oh, and things like that. So that would help too.
Can you give me a specific example? Well, you just gave me a specific example, but do you have
being strict all the time because they won't take you seriously. So I define my humor as working in the study hall. If you're not doing what you're supposed to do, I threaten them, say I'm gonna sign them out. In all actual honesty, I really don't sign them out. I give them the benefit of the doubt sometimes, but sometimes you gotta cater to them and not be so strict.
Second question is, can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
Absolutely. My demonstration for teaching methods is thus being yourself, letting them know who you are, that you're approachable, that they can talk to you, you can talk to them, tell a joke about yourself, a fun fact, and just being yourself generally. That's what opens up to these athletes nowadays. Not just athletes, but students as a whole.
Can you give a specific example? Well, you gave me an example, but can you have any more of a humorous story, a joke, or anything that you use to teach students something?
My example will be, I'll come out my office and I'll make a threat, say, hey, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I'll sign you out. Somebody will be like, oh, shut up, Coach Smith, you ain't gonna do nothing. Then I was like, okay, who said it? The next thing I know, I say, everybody signed out. So they get all mad, but they all still signed in. It's just about level of respect. So once they know that you're serious and they know when to do it and how to do it and when not to do it, it works both ways.
Do you believe that teaching with humorous content improves your teaching or your students' learning?
Yes, absolutely. You have to live life. You can't be strict all the time. You can't. This is not
engaged, and it makes the class more enjoyable.
Can you provide any observations or examples that are specific of a topic that you would teach or that you've been taught where
I would say my individual taxation class, like my teacher she worked for the IRS for 30 years, so like she has examples from, real life situations, so it makes the class like more interesting and you feel like you're really like getting real life, feedback.
Because how
about,
sometimes you're like, where will I use this in real life?
Yeah, and like she really has used the stuff that we're learning, so like that's interesting.
So yeah, you kind of said it yourself.
I'm Christopher Hillman. I'm an athletic academic advisor here at Delaware State University.
Okay, so my first question is, do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and or learning?
I do.
If so, how?
I think it keeps the students kind of focused on you rather than them being distracted, and it keeps their attention.
Can you provide any observations, stories, or examples of where you taught and it was like a humorous story or a joke or something that you used to teach your students? Okay, so it's Mike here. I'm continuing my senior capstone. I'm doing interviews to figure out how comedy is used in teaching and learning.
You got the right one. How you doing? It's Mr. Ashley. My name is Richard Ashley. I am the athletic academic advisor. I work with volleyball, women's basketball, bowling, tennis, golf, and cheerleading. Thank you for having me.
So my first question is, do you believe that using humor in your teaching is helpful for teaching and or learning? If so, how?
I feel like being humorous in teaching always is going to intertwine. An example of that is I previously used to coach, college basketball, and the things I used to do when trying to teach is also be humorous. So an example of that is, okay, if I'm trying to teach you how to shoot, and at the same time you want to follow on like dealing with social media, how do you intertwine that? Well, you like looking good for the camera, so look good when you hold it.
See, I got that. See, his examples are great. So, you gave me an observation and an example already, so I'm going to just go down.
They can relate to. Thank you. Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and or learning?
One day in the lab school, a little boy got in trouble and he was upset. He was just frustrated. And I went over to him to try to cheer him up, just joking with him, trying to smile, giggle. And, he got back
to his regular self eventually and completed his work. So it was really helpful that I could cheer him back up after him being so frustrated over his work.
Okay, thank you. Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach?
More fun instead of being so serious, and they'll be more involved.
Okay, thank you. Can you provide any observations or stories that demonstrate how humor can improve teaching and/or learning?
I did something with the kids where we were doing math problems, and if they got it right, they got candy, and if they got it wrong, they had to dance. And a lot of kids are like nervous and shy, so like they wanted to make sure they got it right, so they didn't have to dance.
Okay, thank you. Can you give me a specific example of a topic you teach in a humorous story, joke, or media that you have used to teach it?
Can you repeat the question?
Can you give